Okay, we're back and we're going to talk about sexual activity in emerging adulthood. So our sex hormones peak around the age of 20. And so what that means is that for males, their testosterone, their androgens are going to be the highest levels that they're going to experience in their entire lives during their around age 20. And for females, that means their estrogens and their progesterones are going to be peaking. The most frequently, okay, so this is a really weird statistic, so let me make sure I report it to you correctly. So when we say the most frequent orgasm is around 19 for males, what we mean is that when you ask males across the different age groups, how many orgasms do you have per week? Men around the age of 19 report higher numbers than they do at any other time in their lives. Now that doesn't mean that they're having sex with a partner. It just means that they're having the most frequent orgasms of their lives. So that's what that means. Females tend to report their most frequent orgasms in regular adulthood by age 35. And a lot of that has to do with sort of understanding their own bodies finally. So these numbers may be changing as women become more familiar with their bodies earlier. But I teach human sexuality, and one of the things I notice is that there hasn't been a huge change in female awareness of their own body structures. So maybe it'll stay at 35 longer than it needs to. 18 to 25 is technically the best time for reproduction, whether you are male or female. Infertility is very rare during this period of time. Birth complications are very rare during this period of time. But we talked in adolescence about what's wrong with having babies before you're ready and some of the social and economic implications of that. So while it is, in fact, physically the best time to be having babies, a lot of people delay reproduction for years or even decades because they don't feel like socially they're ready or economically they're ready. So those are things that need to be balanced. But physically, the best time to reproduce is between 18 and about 30 at the max, and then it starts to go downhill for both sexes after that, as far as fertility rates and complications. So some people have argued that now that contraception is available and so easy, that we'll have fewer unplanned pregnancies and things like that. It turns out that it's true, birth rates have gone down since the introduction of reliable contraception. It used to be in the 1800s that it was very common for families to have 5 children. That was the average. By the time I was growing up in the late 1900s, that sounds horrible. It had dropped to 2. When I was a child, it was 2.5 children per family, and by the time I was a young adult, it was 2 children per family. And right now, it's less than 2 children per family. It's like 1.6, I think, right now in the U.S. So birth rates have absolutely gone down, especially within married couples who can make decisions now about how many children they want rather than just sort of having to have as many as they get. The thing about the availability of contraception, though, is that it has increased the amount of sexual activity. So people are having more sex and enjoying sex more. So that's good. The number of partners has been going up. And depending on which kind of contraception a person is using, that might expose them to sexually transmitted infections and things like that. Even with condoms, not all sexually transmitted infections are prevented by condoms. The ones that rely on skin-to-skin contact can be transmitted from, I don't want to get too vivid here in the middle of a nice lifespan development class, but from any uncovered skin that comes in contact could shed the virus that allows herpes or genital warts to be transmitted. So condoms don't perfectly protect against everything, and the more partners a person has, the more likely they are to contract a sexually transmitted infection. It's just sort of like regular gambling principles that the more you play, the more likely you are to win the game. The more partners you have, the more likely you are to contract an STI. So now, emotional distress with regard to sexual activity. Another impact of having multiple partners is that the more relationships a person has, the more likely they are to have, the excitement of the beginning, which is really fun, and a lot of people are sort of addicted to that feeling that you get when you're in a new relationship. The hypothalamus responds to that as a pleasure-seeking sort of addictive thing when the thrill of meeting somebody new. But then there's the other end. If you have a lot of different relationships, that means that you've had a lot of breakups, and those breakups can really start to pile up and cause distress. And so emotional distress oftentimes goes along with increased rates of partners. Sometimes people are engaging in sexual activity thinking that it means something more than it does to the other person and what they think is going on. And so these are the things that can lead to distress in a couple or in a person. Now, within a couple, attitudes about the purpose of sex have an effect on reproductive choices, and also relationship choices and recreational choices. So here's the thing. You can think about sex as being primarily for reproduction. And if a person has that attitude, that sex is for reproduction, a lot of times they will avoid having sexual activity unless they're planning on reproducing. And so in a couple, that could actually be pretty harmful, because in a couple, having sex without intending to reproduce can be very bonding, and you can look at the other two explanations, right? That it helps to solidify the relationship, makes you feel closer. It also is fun, it's recreational. And so if a person thinks it's just for reproduction, and then their partner would like to have sex outside of reproductive, situations, they'd like to just do it for fun or to enhance their relationship, to feel validated by their partner, things like that, you can imagine that the couple might be at cross purposes and be frustrated. So when a couple mismatches in their what they deep down think the purpose of sex is, it can cause distress within the couple. So it's the kind of thing that, again, I don't mean to accidentally start teaching a human sexuality class, but one of the most important things for couples to do before they become sexually active with each other is probably talk about, like, what do we see the purposes of this being? And of course, a lot of times we don't talk to our partners about a lot of things before we have sexual intercourse with them. We don't talk about birth control. We don't talk about a lot of things. So probably having this conversation isn't very likely necessarily, but it could be really helpful to know what page you're both on before engaging in sexual activity. If you're viewing it as just an opportunity for fun and your partner is looking at it like the beginning of a relationship, this might be the source of a lot of trouble, a lot of miscues. One person feeling used, perhaps, things like that. And so it's really super important for couples to sort of settle out what their basic values are about surrounding sex. And when a couple is committed to each other and they're always together and they're only going to have sex with each other from now on, and one thinks it's only about reproduction and the other thinks it has to do with the other two things, you can imagine how frustrating that might be, and might help fuel affairs and other kinds of things, as the partner who thinks it should be about recreation might go seek it out with somebody else who also agrees it's for recreation. Or if one of the members of the partner thinks it has to do with solidifying the relationship, it might make them feel like they're not valued if the other person doesn't want to have sex with them. And so these are some pretty big things that people need to discuss, probably more than they do discuss. Well, talking about distress leads us into the issue of psychopathology. Here we have the rates of psychological distress that people report based on age. And so you'll notice that this age period, emerging adulthood, has the highest rates of people saying that they are experiencing some kind of psychological distress. Now, what do we mean by psychological distress? Well, that's going to be a lumping together of things like mood disorders. And you'll notice that the 12 to 19 year period is a pretty low rate, and then we start climbing in mood disorders. Women always being ahead of men on the rates. Our highest rates for women are going to be in the 45 to 54 period, but we're climbing up towards that right now. Men are going to be pretty stable in their rates from 20 to 44, and then they start to climb, and then they start to come back down. So mood disorders might be feeding some of the psychological distress rates that the 18 to 25-year-olds report. How about anxiety disorders? Here we have the 15 to 24-year-olds being lumped together. And again, the anxiety disorders are starting to climb. And so, by midlife, they're at their peaks. And again, females are outstripping males in their rates of anxiety disorders. There's this new thing going on in Japan where people have an anxiety disorder called hikikomori. I'm sorry to any of my Japanese students who are just cringing at my horrible pronunciation. The disorder involves such a profound anxiety about leaving the house that 18 to 25-year-olds will oftentimes live in their apartment, have all their things delivered by, from the internet. Their families oftentimes are supporting them as they live independently but don't work and can't leave the house. Sometimes they work from the house. These days you're able to support yourself without having to leave the house, which could be good or could be bad, because people with hikikomori are like literally anxious about ever leaving the house. And some of them are so profoundly socially anxious that they ask the delivery people just to leave their food on the doorstep, and then they collect it after the person has left. So they've noticed this as a change in young adults in Japan recently. And it's probably starting to appear here in the US. We don't have a name like that for it, but a lot of younger people are sort of afraid to branch out and try anything new. Things that used to be very normal in the 18 to 25-year-old period have become things that young adults, millennials, and now Gen Zers are just not really exploring yet. Eating disorders do peak during adolescence. The 15 to 19-year-old is that giant bar of females. And so that would include some people who are in this age bracket that we're talking about, the 18 to 25-year-olds. So some of those numbers are going to be attributable to emerging adulthood as we are defining it. And then you'll notice by the 20s, the rates start going back down. So there's something going on with eating disorders that are tied to maturing and independence and things like that. So when we see this chart of psychological distress being highest among 18 to 25-year-olds, it's probably not exclusively attributable to just mood or just anxiety or just eating disorders, but a combination of all of these things plus probably some others. Maybe just stress. Maybe I'm not diagnosably anxious, but I am stressed about the new demands of adulthood and the idea that I'm graduating from high school and all the things I've ever known, and now it's time for me to start a new chapter of my life, going to college or joining the military or whatever I've chosen. It can be very distressing. It can be really threatening, and so people experience that as psychological distress without necessarily being diagnosable as having a psychological disorder. One of the things with psychopathology that we look at is a diathesis stress model, the idea that there's a combination of factors that go into determining whether somebody experiences any kind of pathological psychological state. So genetic predisposition combines with stressful life events to produce psychological disorders. So it's possible that a lot of adolescent 18 and 19-year-olds and into 25, so our emerging adults, are experiencing sufficient stress that they're reporting psychological distress, but they don't have a predisposition to ultimately develop a psychological disorder. So in the end, they come out resilient and having coped with the stress and moved on into adulthood without difficulty. Whereas others who have a predisposition, that those kinds of stressful life triggers might be just enough to lead to a psychological disorder. All right, exercise. Like I mentioned before, a lot of people in their young adulthood years will say, well, the thing is, I haven't gained any weight, and I'm just really busy with school, or I'm just really busy with work. And even if I have gained a little weight, everybody gains the freshman. When I was a student, it was called the freshman 5. Then it started being called the freshman 10, and now they're calling it the freshman 15. So our amount of weight that we think is kind of normal to be gaining during our freshman year in college is going up. So people are gaining weight and maybe dismissing it, saying it's not really a problem. The thing is, not being fit between 18 and 25 is associated with 4 times the risk of diabetes by the time the person's age 40. So it's actually really important to maintain good health, eating and exercising properly. This is so easy for me to say, obviously, because I've already moved through this phase, and it's not as easy to do. I was in college during this period of time. I by age 25 had my master's degree and was working on my PhD, but you have to do stuff on purpose. You have to work at it. And so, for example, when I was in grad school on my PhD, I lived about 2.5 miles from school, but I walked to school every day. Things like that. It took me longer, but I walked to school. Actually, some days I tried to ride my bike, but it was kind of hilly and it was kind of hard coming home, so I didn't like it. So walking was better for me. I didn't mind walking the hills as much as I didn't like trying to get my mountain bike up the hills. But finding some way to do it is what's really super important. Now you'll notice I lived 2.5 miles away from school. Today I would love to ride my bike to school when I teach in person, but I live 16 miles from school because I live in the Puget Sound area where it's too expensive to live near school. So the idea of being able to exercise as part of my everyday life has changed. I can't do that anymore. And so, there are constrictions on what we can do. Joining a gym and then not ever going. We do a lot of things. We try and do these, but fitting it into your actual life is probably the best way to do it. So one of the things that they say for physical activity is if you can do it outside, it's a huge benefit not only for your body, but then also for your psychology. And so if you can, fit in a 15-minute walk every single day outside, that's supposed to be great for you physically and mental health wise. Of course, if you live in Western Washington, good luck with the rain, right? So it's difficult. It's difficult for everybody, but those people who report that they are not physically active increases with age. And so things that you can start as a pattern when you're young makes it easier for you to maintain it as you get older. That's the basic message. Of course, a lot of times our biggest concern in young adulthood is one of our biggest concerns in adolescence, which is weight management. People are mostly concerned about their looks and not as concerned about long-term health when they're in this age bracket. So one of the things about weight management that people need to be really aware of is that if you've been weighing a certain amount for some amount of time, that means that your body has determined that this is your set point. This is the weight that will be automatically managed for you by homeostasis. It takes a lot to convince the set point to change. Once you've set up a set point, your body will kind of drive you to eat things that will maintain that weight and discourage you from dropping weight through the use of metabolism. Your metabolism is controlled by your hypothalamus through your pituitary gland and then into your thyroid gland. And so your metabolism is really how many calories you burn even at rest, how much food intake you need given the exercise or the caloric output that you make. Now here I have a person who she needs to lose weight. So she starts off, there's her set point. She diets, gets down to that low point at the bottom. And she's thinking, yay, I did it. Now I can relax a little bit and just eat just a little bit more than I had during my weight loss diet. And what ends up happening is you not only gain weight back to where you had been, but a little bit more. Now this is a overdone picture to just make it really clear what's going on. So she gets down to a weight that's way below what her set point had been, and then her body says, oh my gosh, there was a famine. I need to completely prepare for the next famine. So extra weight is held even though the caloric intake was the same. So she says, oh my gosh, this is horrible. I actually weigh more. So she diets again. She gets down to not quite as low as she did the first time, and then just changes her intake a little bit. And of course, this is an overblown picture. But her body says, oh, we survived another famine. I need to collect more calories in case that famine comes again. So that's why it's really super important not to diet weight away, because you don't ever really set your set point down to a lower amount. You just are losing fat and convincing your brain that you keep repeatedly experiencing famine. The better way to shed weight is to speed up your metabolism through just chronically burning more calories than you're taking in, and doing it like in small amounts, burning more calories than you take in. So had she actually done stuff to change her metabolism, she probably would have ended up maybe not quite as light as she did in the first place, but fitter than she was to start off with. And that's the important thing, I think, when people try and lose weight, is that they need to shoot for a healthy weight. How about risk taking? I think that's a pretty good characterization of things that happen in emerging adulthood, is that people are willing to take risks of all kinds during young adulthood that they may not have taken when they were even younger, and definitely are less likely to take when they get older. So here we have, for example, taking risks that could end up in death, right? And so you see the fatal accident rate, and this is for drivers. And so early emerging adulthood, the 18, 19-year-olds are in that higher rate of fatal accidents per 100,000 drivers. But then when we get to middle adulthood, when we're 25 to 55, 60 even, we're at a very low plateau of fatal accidents. And a lot of that has to do with the mindset of the emerging adult. The idea that they are quick enough that they could react if something jumped out in front of them while they were driving, or that they can handle their car at a faster speed, or that they can text at the same time that they're driving, things like that. As they get older and wiser and start to realize the fallacy of their thinking, their fatal car accidents go down. Now, if you go into older, again, there we have that dramatic change after age 70. And by the way, notice the green line is the fatal accidents per 10,000 drivers in that age group. And then the red line is the fatal accidents per 100 million miles driven by that age group. So you'll notice that the over 70s don't have as many fatal accidents as the under 25s, but they don't drive as many miles, and that's part of the reason why. So if we factor in how many miles they drive, all of a sudden the over 70s start to show a lot more accidents. But see, the reason why older people drive fewer miles is because they have the sense to realize that, I have some blind spots in my eyes now, or my reaction time has slowed, or I don't see well in the dark anymore, and things like that. Whereas younger people, the 25s and under, are less likely to make those kinds of corrections for their fallacial thinking. And so they'll drive too fast, they'll drive too close, they'll drive distractedly, and they're more likely to have accidents. How about the adults with accidental injury? My most recent data I could find was from 2007. And you'll notice that our highest rates of accidental injuries occur in the emerging adulthood period. We become a lot more cognizant of danger as we age. There's a reason why insurance companies charge more for people who are under age 25 than they do for people who are over that, because we become more sensible as we age, and we're less likely to take unwarranted risks. So this is the most likely age to have unprotected sex, even more so than teenagers. Young adults, emerging adults, are more likely to have sex without any birth control, or to have sex with just oral contraceptives or hormonal contraceptives on the part of the female, and not use condoms, even when this is not in a steady relationship. They're more likely to carry guns. They're more likely to drive without their seatbelts. They're more likely to try addictive drugs, thinking that they won't become addicted to it. They're more likely to be employed in edge work. So here I have a picture from Deadliest Catch, right? That's what we call edge work, where it's very dangerous, but it's high paid. That's why it's high paid, is because it's dangerous. Here I have a person climbing a skyscraper because he's working in construction. I mean, that's building a skyscraper. Yikes, it horrifies me. Scared of heights. Here I have a prostitute, working in prostitution. She probably feels like nothing bad's going to happen to her, or she probably feels like maybe she could figure her way out of it. Prostitutes are very likely to be victims of assault or rapes, and so it's a very dangerous job. Joining the military is edge work. Here I have a woman who's a fighter pilot, and these are very dangerous jobs. Being a bull rider, competing in the X Games, right? These are things that young people are most likely to do. And I picked the X Games one because a lot of those people are actually professionals, and they make their living doing these dangerous sports. But they also participate in extreme sports just for fun. So I just grabbed a bunch of young adults doing stuff that, older adults go, ugh. Right? It's, some of these things are dangerous, some of these things, and that's what makes it fun, is the thrilling part of it. And so young adults are willing to push the edge. They are willing to take risks. They kind of still suffer from that invincibility fallacy that we picked up in adolescence, and so they kind of feel like nothing bad's going to happen to them. They're smart enough and that this won't happen. They take risks in the form of using substances. So here we have substance abuse at various ages. And we've got alcohol is purple, and this would be binging on alcohol, which is defined as 5 or more drinks on one occasion. Then we have the cigarette smokers in the orange line, and then we have illegal drug use in the past month in the blue line. And so you'll notice that the peak for all of them, well, I guess the binge drinking peaks in the 21 to 25s, but these are all going to be peaking in the 18 to 25 if you lump those two together. Right, those are going to be the highest rates across the lifespan for all of these things. The smoking stays stable for the 26 to 29-year-olds and then starts to decline. But yeah, we're at the peak for all the substance abuse use, and especially in these sort of moved past experimentation and maybe are doing more. So a lot of risk taking in the young adults. All right, well, we will move in the next chapter to cognitive development.